Welcome to From Seed to Script, where the healing journey begins. Picture a world where seeds of hope blossom into a symphony of relief, a place where nature's remedy meets cutting-edge knowledge. You're invited to embark on an extraordinary journey through the lush and verdant landscapes of Pennsylvania's thriving medical cannabis industry. This podcast is proudly brought to you by Penn Health Group, cultivators of compassion, and pioneers of Pennsylvania's medical cannabis program. Nestled in the heart of the Keystone State, PHG doesn't just cultivate cannabis, they nurture a vision of wellness. Alongside PHG is compassionate certification centers, trailblazers of access and hope. Together, they explore the journey from seed to script, guiding qualified patients toward a better, more vibrant life through the power of medical cannabis. Your guide for this incredible adventure is co-host and curator of conversations, Brandon Delonzo. He'll lead listeners through the intricate tapestry of cannabis culture. Joining him is none other than Dr. Brian Donner, physician, founder, educator, and advocate for medical marijuana. As they delve deep into the heart of From Seed to Script, listeners can expect eye-opening discussions, captivating stories, and a kaleidoscope of perspectives from those at the forefront of Pennsylvania's medical cannabis movement. So, buckle up, take a deep breath, and get ready for a magical odyssey. Because here, the journey is not just from seed to script, but a journey from healing to hope.
For today's episode, we are joined by Diana Briggs, and today we have an incredibly inspiring conversation ahead of us. She is a true pioneer in the medical cannabis community here in Pennsylvania, a founder of Compassionate Caregivers LLC, a dedicated group of advocates and caregivers, working tirelessly to connect patients, caregivers, doctors, and the industry at large, all with bringing the goal of comfort and healing to those in need across our state. Her journey in advocacy began from a deeply personal place. As a founding member and former director of Campaign for Compassion, Diane was instrumental in the passage of Act 16, Pennsylvania's medical marijuana law. Her grassroots efforts with C4C earned her national recognition, receiving an award for Americans for Safe Access for their impactful lobbying efforts. Diane currently resides in Export, PA with her husband Mike and their 3 children. Her son Ryan, who suffers from intractable seizures, has been the driving force behind her passionate advocacy. Today, Diane continues to serve the community as a patient care advocate for the Medical Marijuana Advisory Board here in Pennsylvania. We're thrilled to have her on the show today and share her journey, her insights, and ongoing work she's doing here in Pennsylvania. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you all.
Absolutely. So I think let's just start at the beginning.
Can I do a little bit of housekeeping real quick? Just
Absolutely.
To let you know, I am here, in my own person today. My thoughts, opinions are mine and mine alone, and not in any way from the PA Advisory Board.
Absolutely.
So the beginning is my son, Ryan, who unfortunately suffered an anoxic episode at birth, which left him with multiple disabilities. He has a tracheostomy, a feeding tube, and within minutes of his birth, as his brain swelled, seizures began. And they never stopped. There were years of, maybe not as aggressive. We would find a new medication, and we called it the honeymoon phase that every medication comes with, unfortunately, and you'd get really excited for a few months, and then quickly the medication would stop. I think that we were warned very early on that puberty for these children with these types of illnesses, the body chemistry changing would certainly be a concerning time, and they did their best to prepare us for that. In the process, my husband and I did not stay with just traditional methods. We looked outside of the box, and we're always looking for something to give him, as we discussed, quality over quantity. And when you have a child like Ryan, you really just want quality. You want them to, them to sleep at night. Right. So simple. You just want them to sleep at night. And we weren't getting that. So against some family and friends, we took Ryan to another country for stem cell treatment. We treated him with hyperbaric oxygen therapy. And in all of those cases, we saw some improvement. Not so much seizure. And then puberty hit. and we were not prepared. When I say 400 seizures a day, that was what myself and his nurses could count. My daughters will tell you that's how they learned to count, by counting their brother's seizures. And if you left the room for any amount of time, whether it be to go to the restroom, of course, that was really the only time you left Ryan alone. How many did you miss? So we implanted a vagus nerve stimulator, which sends an electric current to Ryan's brain, trying to stop those synapses from happening and causing. We looked into hemispherectomies, but we couldn't prove that there was one side of the brain injured over another. It looked like his brain just didn't continue to develop after the traumatic brain injury at birth. And 2013, I think we were probably at our lowest. Our house was hopeless. Pitch black. Ryan really didn't interact. We were canceling therapies because he just seized all day, every day. And I think our team of doctors, which we saw every 30 days, just shrugged. They really didn't have much more to offer us. At that point, he had failed 10 pharmaceuticals, some coming with horrible side effects. He was on the ketogenic diet, which we called the starvation diet. He did not gain weight. So I think I made a helpless, hopeless post on social media, and my best friend saw it. And it was late at night, and I was just up watching him seize. And she called me, and she said, I need you to not say anything, but I need to tell you something. And she said, before we get off of this phone, you have to promise you're going to look up Charlotte Figi. She's from Colorado. And she told me a little bit about this cannabis treatment. I think it was actually Charlotte's Web was the name at the time. And she said, wouldn't you want to just try it? And I remember thinking she's crazy. The cannabis I knew was a joint being passed around as teenagers, and thought, how would he do that? But of course, we got off the phone, and I think I typed it into my social media bar on Facebook, and a friend from Canada had posted Weed One with Sanjay Gupta, and it was sharing Charlotte's story. So as my oldest daughter says, that a family of advocates was born. It was full steam ahead at that point.
Very well said. We spoke a little bit about this before we started the podcast officially tonight, but I think something hard for people to grasp, and maybe just me knowing from speaking to you beforehand, but as a parent, how do you make that choice to choose something that's not necessarily accepted, or in this case at the time, even legal?
It certainly wasn't an overnight decision. We started advocating here and asking our doctors. We went to my neurologist first. This was late 2013, the fall of 2013. She would not even discuss cannabis, had not heard of Charlotte Figi. And then I went to my son's pediatrician, who I adored. He was the mayor of Ryan's Village, and I think I was shocked by his response. He was a little bit older, and he kind of shrugged his shoulders, and he's like, what's the worst that's going to happen? He's going to get the munchies and maybe get a little tired. And I felt like in that moment he was listening, but was horrified to learn that there wasn't really much in Pennsylvania that I could do to help him. And that's when I meant, I call them my people, the other families in PA who had children just like mine. I believe we all started in a group called PA Advocates for MMJ. Julie Michael started that group, and then most of us were parents of children with epilepsy or some form of diagnosis with seizures. And Campaign for Compassion was founded in 2014. And then we met with our local legislature, and it did not go well. Most didn't want to take meetings with us, didn't want to take a phone call. We kind of got pushed off to staff quite a bit. Those early days, the stigma of this plant led first. So very quickly, we were referred to as the pot moms. A lot thought that we wanted this medicine for ourselves, that we were going to smoke it or use it. At that point, we did know most of our kiddos would not be able to access it that way. We learned enough about Charlotte Figue's story to know that this plant was turned into an oil. And not that I begrudge anybody who didn't know that. My husband, that was his first question to me was, so how's this going to work for Ryan? Am I going to have to inhale the joint and blow it into his face? So I don't, begrudge the naivety of that, because I didn't know until I had seen Charlotte's story of these other methods that were being used. But I think that as hope-filled as we were about our advocacy and about a law that we knew was written and, being pushed in our legislature, meeting with some of those same legislature was very feeling hopeless, and how long was this going to take? We realized very quickly that this was not an overnight decision, that this was not a decision with ourselves and our child's doctors, his team that has known him, that has known us. It was now a decision that had to be made by our senators and representatives in the state of Pennsylvania. So I think that hopelessness set in. And of course, it was still quite gray, that area of whether or not CBD could be shipped. So that's where we started.
Yeah, this is pre-Farm Bill, so we're very much so in a gray area.
Yeah. So that is kind of our beginning with, this plant. And I can say that we noticed things. We noticed an alertness about Ryan that we might not have seen, for months. And sadly, no seizure control really in those early steps. And of course, our advocacy continued. And we started meeting doctors from other states who were coming in and talking to our legislature. I don't know that I did not meet her in person, but we met some of the Stanley brothers who created Charlotte's Web, and I believe they came in for one of our advocacy events. And so to be able to talk to these people and doctors who were treating children just like ours in other states was so uplifting. Of course, went down the rabbit hole of YouTube and found different people who had been using this medicine for a very long time. And I really think that began the discussion in early to mid 2014, my husband and I, of, is this something we could do? Certainly we discussed leaving the state, taking Ryan, just like that.
Absolutely, because you almost need to at that point. Yeah. The potential legal consequences when you're talking about dealing with minors or pediatric patients, even if things are in the best interest and it's the right choice, you have to be cognizant of that. So, and I think you said something, Diana, to me that it seems to be like a common thread in a lot of families when you see is this feeling of desperation when the modern medicine where we are today, there's no more answers and there's no more help. And where do you go at that point? And so many times, at least that I've seen in my clinical experience now, where cannabis is that answer. And there's not many other things out there where people, that ray of hope that they have actually works. You know what I mean? So I think it was, obviously you and I spoke about this before, but not only very brave, but it's sometimes that desperation can drive the best decision making, right?
And
thank goodness you did that.
I was going to say that is exactly where we were. We were absolutely desperate. And I remember thinking, and Michael and I talking about it, that we didn't think he'd survive puberty. He was always sick. He was catching every illness that my daughters, we called them the carriers, that they brought in from school. He caught it. a cold for them for 3 days. Ryan would be hospitalized for 2 weeks. We really got to a point where we thought he wasn't going to be with us much longer unless we made a decision. We had made enough connections at that point with others in other states. November of 2014, I had a meeting. And at that point, my husband and I agreed to start illegally treating him with cannabis oil, with the THC, the dreaded THC. And that was our answer. That first week, Ryan actually slept. He went to bed at night and slept for hours. And this was a child who used to seize for 72 hours straight. And then he would sleep for maybe 4-5 hours and then be right back up again. You didn't wake him, because if you woke him, he went into, in our world, it was called clustering. Some other families called it status, because Ryan his were mostly upper body involved. My child cannot sit up on his own, but with a tonic-clonic, it'll bring him up off of a bed or out of a chair into a sitting position. That's how aggressive these seizures were. And so to kind of, watch him sleep, I can remember my husband and I standing over his bed just in full panic mode because he was asleep. And of course, pulse ox was on and checking for respirations. And he looked comfortable. And I remember my mother saying, well, was he high? And I was like, I can't tell, but maybe, maybe. He didn't seem, he didn't seem distressed in any way. So that was the beginning of our journey into the, illegal use of this medication. Of course, for all intents and purposes, everybody believed it was CBD, and we did not share anything different for the next 2 years while we advocated. In fact, we were asked, a couple of reporters had asked, and I would not go on camera and admit, because of the fear of losing my children.
Absolutely.
It's a huge stigma. Yeah. I mean, and even now, there's still a lot of stigma surrounding it about people potentially worried about CYS coming through the door or something like that. I want to take a step back for a moment. You early on mentioned the advocacy work that you were doing out of need, which is important. At that time, were there any other organizations other than yourself from this medical perspective pushing to get this in place in Pennsylvania?
Absolutely.
Were you joined by other people? Were you?
Absolutely. My first rally was a Pittsburgh Normal rally. I was asked to speak, and I think I had met Patrick and Teresa through our PA advocates group, or C4C, I'm not sure. And they had asked if we would come and speak, and just to share how naive, this was early 2014, mind you. And I want to say Shenley Park in Pittsburgh is where this rally was held. And my mother came, my sister, my niece, who probably were a little more knowledgeable than I was at the time about cannabis, because as we walked up over the hill with my son in his wheelchair, I looked at all of them and I went, what is that god-awful smell? As you can imagine, they laugh about that to this day, because that was cannabis. And I went, it smells like that now, because it had been some time since I had smelled it last. So that was my introduction into it. And I often say to Patrick Nightingale that he taught us moms how to advocate for this plant. And I feel bad because I think that they got the stigma of the pot guys that just wanted to smoke their weed, so I appreciate them, and all of their steps prior to us, but I don't think we could have done it without them. Philly Normal, of course, joined. We talked about Tom Perko's group.
Medical Cannabis Society.
Yeah. They joined forces, and I hope there's not more that I'm missing, but I'm sure there is. But yeah, we all kind of joined forces. Oh, Keystone Cannabis Coalition, Les Stark.
That's right.
Yeah. In fact, he was inspiring. I would stay up at night with Ryan and read all of his rally notes and his speeches, and he had been at it a really, really long time. Bless his
That's a
heart
name
for,
I have not heard for a while.
sticking
Yeah.
around.
Exactly,
Yeah. So I have to say, all of us kind of came together in these groups on Facebook, and our C4C group had a buddies group where we, did a lot of our talking and planning of events. And we all were asked to hold events if we could. And the two legislative senators had offered to come and meet and educate along with other advocates. And so I reached out to the local moose in my little town of Export. And I want to say that was probably June, July of 2014, as well as my friend Heather had reached out. And I think hers was at a church, but we had, the senators come into town with some advocates. Patrick was there, Joe Boots, one of our veterans who advocated for this program as well. Sadly, a day or two before my event, we got booted from the moose. The stigma was real.
Oh.
And some of their members did not want us there discussing medical marijuana. Lucky for us, the Italian club across the street picked us up, and we were able to have it the same time, same day. And it was shocking how many people showed up. It was a full house listening to, us discuss, what our thoughts were, what this program could be, and who it could help. And Joe Boots, got up and shared how it was so beneficial for him. And it was exciting. And I think media started paying attention to us moms with our sick kiddos. We certainly got a lot of calls and interest after that. So much so that they started following us to Harrisburg for our rallies there.
Really?
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
That means you were doing it right then.
Yeah, it was really powerful. Like, that was, there was a lot of strength behind that, which is what was needed at that time, right?
I think so. And I think that it was really hard to look away from our sick kids. Many did. I shared that with you earlier. Many did. Many made promises and then reneged on those promises the days of the vote, which was, made us all helpless again.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah. And, but then there were some who shared their own stories of a family member who could have benefited from this medicine or was benefiting from the plant. And I think that really it came down to, we just kept showing up. If a mom or a child was sick and couldn't make an appointment, one of us picked up the slack. I have to say Lolly Bench was the leader of all leaders. And we could not have done it without all of her hard work because she lived right down the road from the Capitol. So she was always showing up.
Right.
But that's what we did. We just kept showing up. We just kept going back. And I think at one point, maybe we shamed them into this vote more than anything, or they just wanted to get rid of us because we just kept coming back.
Well, that's what was needed. Yeah. I mean, if you guys hadn't made that trip weekly, if not more, we wouldn't be where we're at. That's for sure. And I know I wouldn't be in the position that I'm in if this program didn't exist. I know I had spoken to you before this, and I didn't receive a diagnosis for PTSD until 3.5, 4 years ago. And originally I was treating anxiety and depression. And now that I have this program, I have a whole different outlook on life and stuff. And I mean, I'm thankful for people like you who fought for individuals like myself and your son to have that option. Early on, when you were advocating, what, if any, were there any roadblocks or major hurdles that you guys found yourself jumping through early on with the advocacy, or trying to reach certain people and you just couldn't get to them? Or what was the biggest challenge early on?
I think it was the fear. Reefer madness was a thing.
Really?
We had some who, wouldn't even talk to us about it. I shared earlier that Ryan's doctors didn't want to talk about it for fear of maybe, what their bosses would think. A lot of the legislature who met with us, in one case in particular, my husband was super excited because he thought we had turned this guy. He sat and watched my son across from his desk just continue to seize our entire 30 minutes or whatever. And at one point, he grabbed my knee, shaking it, because my husband was convinced, because at this point, this legislature was saying all of the right things and how sorry he was that my son was having to go through with this, and that really he hoped that this medicine could help him. And then he ended with, but my constituents would not support this and not support me voting for it. So I'm going to have to be a no. And just having to thank him for his time and walk out of there, and how crushing that was. And I remember in that moment seeing my husband realize that not every conversation is going to end the way we need it to end. And I really was, I think, this fear of what would their constituents say? What would their families say? I had one say, well, if I vote for this, then my children will think it's okay. And we had to stress that, it was here. That plant was in this state already. And wouldn't you feel better about knowing that it's coming from a regulated program where we know everything that they're doing and all of the tests are running, and then you know that what they're using is safe and not what we know they're already using.
Yeah. And that fear you talk about, that's real, and that's real in patients, that's real in advocates, it's real in politicians, it's real in doctors. I mean, we've talked about this ad nauseum before, but when I started doing this as a physician, I was getting tomatoes thrown at me. I was, again, I worried about what I would say. Can I work for somewhere? Is insurance still going to keep it? So that fear is real, and I think it was present probably with everybody involved, because you're just walking into the unknown, and even if you know that it's good and it's right, you can't get rid of that fear. You just got to sort of jump into the deep end, And I'm glad you did, Diana.
I am too now.
Yeah.
Very well said. Very well said. So let's jump ahead a little bit. Act 16 is passed and approved, and it's here. But you've had access to cannabis, safe harbor. You can have access, but now you can actually go to the dispensary in your state and legally purchase this. What was that like? What was that feeling like?
That was an incredible day. I'm not sure I even shared this with you, and you know this, but I was the first to purchase in the state of Pennsylvania. And I honestly don't know that I believed it until I got there that day that it was actually happening. The safer harbor gave us the legal access. So the fear was gone. We no longer worried about losing any of our children, because with that letter, and I believe I received that in mid 2016, so summer of 2016, I had that letter in hand. And that was the first time that I did what the letter allowed me to do. I went to another state and I brought it home. I'm not convinced when they wrote that they thought we would do that, because certainly legally I wasn't really allowed, but I had that safe harbor, and I had Patrick Nightingale on speed dial. So lucky for us, I did not need him. So the signing of the bill was a huge day, but standing at that dispensary in Little Butler and walking in there and purchasing for the first time, unforgettable.
Who would have ever thought, especially in Butler?
In Butler.
No shade to any of our Butler listeners. Sorry.
Yeah. I think it was an hour drive for me that day, and I cried the whole way there. I cried the whole way home. I called my mother on the way home and said, you might want to turn on the news tonight, because it was an incredible day. And I was followed in by my dear friend, Heather Shooker, for her daughter. She was the second caregiver to purchase that day. And Patrick Nightingale was the first patient to purchase that day. So yeah, it was, I have celebrated every step of this program because we all worked really, really hard for it. Did not end up exactly how we wanted it, of course, in the end. Right. Certainly was not easy to access the program in the beginning, but I would do it over again every single day.
100%. 100%. I think something, I don't even know if we had spoken about this in our first episode, but the way that the program was originally founded, and then with the addition of flower, I don't think a lot of people know about that. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, because believe it or not, some of the advocate community felt that we had sold out because flower was not in the end bill, and there was a lot of back and forth. And I think at one point, it was the moms sold out for a CBD light bill or something like that. And I don't think any of us, certainly we knew THC was allowed in our program, and we certainly wanted flower, but unfortunately it was not on the table at the end. And I think we all hoped and prayed that it would quickly follow. I don't think I imagined how quickly it did follow. Right. And that was an exciting day as well. I was there that day buying some flower. So to see the steps that continued to happen were just as exciting as seeing, the beginning of the program roll out. And I think I feel the same way 8 years later. We've only continued to grow. Right. Still not perfect. We still have our opponents. And we still have a lot more we can do, but our list of illnesses have only increased. Our products have increased. Access for patients has only increased, and that I think will continue to happen. Even if full legalization comes, there's still going to be, patients like my son who I won't be growing a flower. Just to tell you, I kill everything in my house. Nothing survives me.
We can get you a nice one
a little. I like that.
No, and you have a great point there. That even if things at some point do become adult use, recreational use, the medical applicability of cannabis is not going anywhere, and it's just increasing. And when, in my opinion, and I know I'm biased, but when you look at 5, 10, 20 years down the road, the biggest deal about cannabis isn't going to be its recreational availability. It's going to be its uses and its utilization in medicine, right? Because it's been around forever. We've just scratched the surface. We're on the precipice of being able to do real research and everything. So that's where it is as a medicine, and I think that gets so overlooked even now that the stigma has gone away, or is going away, I'll say, but it's still not primarily looked at as a medicine, right? Good example of this, my kids. They're 13 and 11 now. They think cannabis is medicine. Just why? Because that's all they hear me talk about more than anything else. At some point, I think we'll be there, right? Where it's cannabis is a medicine, or cannabis is therapeutic, and that's what it's about.
Yeah, we're definitely in a very transitionary phase with cannabis as a whole. Looking at it historically, I do kind of want to jump ahead a little bit, just since you had kind of brought it up, but adult use certainly is a lot of times the next step in a medical program. Medical program tends to preface most adult use programs. How do you feel about that progression and the need and desire to keep and maintain the efficacy of what has been built for the medical program? Do you feel like it's going to suffer in any way? I mean, obviously we don't know what potential legislation may or may not come out, but as a mother who's advocated for this, what are your thoughts on that?
I think if I've learned anything in the last 10 years with this plant is I don't fear it. I have feared the pharmaceuticals that my son has taken his whole life. I have never feared. I remember being afraid, but now 10 years later, I can say with, definitely it has never harmed Ryan in any way. Even when I gave too much, the worst that's happened is I caused more seizures, believe it or not, which we had seen. So I knew to just pull back, So I did see Colorado's program, medical on one side, legalization, legal on the other side. And that day I had to shop the legal side. And yet I was looking for medicine for my son here in Pennsylvania. I have to say it was really great because the young girl came around and talked to me and gave me different ideas from the legal side. It was pretty much the same, except I was paying a lot more on the legal side than I would have on the medical side. So I would love if if that's how they implemented it. I think that's important. They're already here. The dispensaries are already knowledgeable and might have that conversation. As Dr. Donner said, this plant is medicinal. If somebody comes into my home and they're talking about an illness, there is a tincture, there is a drop, a troche that I could recommend. And if they are already using this plant, then you need to find a doctor. You need to talk about your diagnoses, as you said. Maybe get a proper diagnosis after years of not having one, and use it as the medicine that I think it was always intended to be.
Yeah, and exactly, Diana. And we can, no matter what happens, we can never, ever overlook the patients and it as a medicine first, no matter what. And that's one of the things that sometimes I get worried about from an adult use standpoint is that the medicine or the therapeutics become secondary, right? So, to me, it's just always keeping those people first, and why did we get to this point? Because those folks needed it, So as a doctor, that's one of the things, and we're heading that way, but I always get a little bit worried that the patients become second fiddle. So, but I do think you mentioned Colorado. There's been some other states that have had pretty good examples of how to maintain the integrity of the medical program and give those folks the benefits as well while still incorporating adult use, right? So it's definitely doable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would agree. And I will say the one thing I think that sets our program currently apart from any others leading into adult use is that we do have that research component. Yeah. And so at its very base, that research is still going on and is going to continue. Ideally, once or if adult use happens, it's going to be happening. So I know that medical component is absolutely still going to be there. I mean, I'm very adamant, and we've all probably said the same thing, that all cannabis use is considered medical pretty much. I mean, I always, personal experience, but speak back to, we had spoken about this earlier, but I used to use cannabis to help me with sleep and to help me relax, but I didn't know why I felt that this really helped for a long time until I realized that it was part of my PTSD and treating parts of that. But a lot of times I think people have a lot of those similar stories where I used it before I went to bed and it really helped, or I used it recreationally to relax after work. Well, you're still relaxing. Isn't that still not part of your wellness? Is that helping you decompress? Like, at its very base, you're still getting that medical component to it. And I think we sometimes lose sight of that, but I would believe that Pennsylvania is going to continue to maintain a strong component to the medical program, I think, to support things. I know that's important for us as an organization. We've always been very educationally focused, and I think that's the driving force for making decisions in cannabis. Even as an everyday user, if you're not treating a specific ailment or something, understanding the plant and what you're looking for and what's going to happen by using a certain strain and what those terpenes and compounds are that make that up, I think we can help to create a more informed end user, whether that's adult use or not. But for our organization, it's always educationally driven. And I think whether they choose to use it however they see fit, that will always be kind of our approach as an organization, whether we're in medical program or adult use. I can't speak for a lot of other organizations, but I know that will always be an important part to us. So.
I think that's very important. And I think to your earlier comment about if you're using it, my daughters know that if they have friends or we have family that are using it, then I'm going to have that conversation about it's medicine, use it in the way it's intended, and then maybe get into the program and have other options. Maybe that tincture at bedtime, that RSO, will help with your pain more. The lotion, as we discussed earlier, one of my favorite to the program, and it have used on a lot of my older patients, for joint pain and helped with them sleeping at night. So there's so many options that I think that our program will be needed far into the future for all of those people. Not all of us are going to be expert growers.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that you just spoke to something I don't think people speak to often, which it's really nice to hear from an advocate's perspective, is you keep repeating this. Well, if you're using it, get a card. Join the program. Like your full support of the program is just astounding. But what I think you're speaking to even more beyond that is just the availability to help yourself. I don't think people realize that those options exist. Like you said, there's a lotion. Like you can get a lotion. You can use that on your knees. You can use it on your back. You don't have to vaporize everything, which is
And cannabis awesome. Is what, sorry to interrupt you, but cannabis is literally one of the only things that we have in medicine where patients get the let's call it the therapeutic freedom to sort of treat themselves, right? And this is a completely new concept for doctors, right? We're not used to doing that. And honestly, it's one of the things that I'm so thankful for Diana, because it was one of the best lessons to me, right? That look, you might not have all the answers, but we're going to be able to work our way through this. And as you commented before, we can do it safely. There's really not anything else in medicine where we're able to say, okay, you're the patient. We're going to put some more tools in your toolbox, but you get to use these tools on your own as you best see fit. Right now, we're there to guide you. We're there to help. We're due to that. But that's a profound change in just the thought process of medicine, right? And there's something super empowering about being able to treat yourself or be able to treat one of your loved ones or somebody like that, right? So, and again, that was one of the biggest lessons, Diane. You and I probably never even talked about this, but that I learned the importance of that, right? Back in the day, it was sort of a game changer, in my opinion. Oh, yeah. Thank you.
And we wouldn't be here without you. I shared with Brandon earlier that even though we had the support of Ryan's physicians and they knew, I wasn't quiet. We were on the local news. I was doing stories in the local paper and allowing them into my home to see Ryan. So they all knew when this program was implemented, my son was getting certified one way or another. And now the pediatrician at the time did sign for my safe harbor, and I appreciated that, but there was no act from either of my physician groups to become certifying physicians. So I remember seeing Dr. Donner in an event where we were educating on the program, and I vented to him that with all of the support that they did give us, while we advocated at the end, when it was going to happen, certainly they were clapping for us and happy for us. But that none on his team were a certifying physician. So that day he said, call me. And I did.
I'm glad you did. I'm glad you did.
So Ryan was one of his first certified in the state of PA.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel so grateful for our relationship. And it was one of those things where you just feel like it was sort of meant to happen. Do you know what I mean? And then how it developed from there. So, and not only you, but your whole family, Diane. I just, how much I think the world of you guys. So
thank you. We do too. I was nervous about coming here today, and my oldest was like, "It's Dr. Donner. You two have educated in every bathroom closet there is on this side of the state." Okay, it wasn't a bathroom closet.
Yeah.
There was some some older looking libraries, but
there's some touch and go
if
times.
somebody invited us to come and talk about this program, we showed up.
Yeah, we did. And I honestly, I look back on those times too with I'm really happy about that, proud. Like, it makes me smile. And like you said, to be part of that, and it's easy to forget where we are now. Things are so advanced, but it wasn't always like that, right?
No, not at all.
Talk about boots on the ground. You guys were really sending the message out there.
We actually were, and I think that it was complicated for us, and we worked right alongside the lawmakers who were writing it. I remember asking to get on a call and try to log in and register Ryan, because as a caregiver he had to register through me because he was a minor. That wasn't easy, and then all of the steps that had to be taken, or fingerprinting that had to be done. And I think my drive was an hour drive for that as well, when the program started. So yeah, I mean, to see where we were and now today, light years away from that beginning.
For people who are not entirely familiar with the program, would you mind explaining a little bit about your role as a caregiver and what that means and how you became a caregiver?
Well, Ryan was 16 when the program was signed into law. So as a minor, he could not have accessed the program anyway. Because of his disabilities, Ryan will never walk into a dispensary on his own. So in my case, I had to create a caregiver profile, and then under that, my minor child, which is Ryan. And so I carry a card, and attached to that card is Ryan. So there's no card for Ryan in our program. What I receive is a letter from the Department of Health Medical Marijuana department, and it's a letter basically saying that Ryan is legally allowed to use medicine. When I go into the dispensary with my caregiver card, his name is the one that they find on my card, and that's who I'm shopping for that day. All of the labels from that dispensary on the medicine that I purchase has his name.
Okay.
So my name is nowhere, on that, but I use that card to access the dispensary for him.
Are you able, for those who don't know, are you able to be a caregiver for more than one person at a time?
Yes. In the beginning of our program, when it first started, we were allowed to have 5 patients on one card.
Okay.
And that is how PA Compassionate Caregivers was started. We got a call from a friend at the Department of Health who said that a young man in our area, his mother had cancer. And the process of him going through the caregiver and getting his fingerprints at the beginning was taking weeks to get that process. They didn't believe she had weeks. So I had just met that week with a nurse who used to take care of my son, who was getting into the medical marijuana program and wanted to introduce me to the doctors that were going to certify with her group. And so between myself and a couple of other caregivers, a couple I mentioned earlier, we got together, got his mother certified in the program. My friends became the caregiver for her and was able to go to a local dispensary that we called into and asked if they had the special medicine that the doctor had suggested. And within, I think, 24 hours of that first call from the Department of Health, that young man's mother was able to receive her cannabis, and legally from the program. And I remember how uplifting. He called me that night, and I think we were on the phone for a couple of hours. A man I had never met, and yet talked him through the fear of giving this, to his mother and trying to help her through her pain and discomfort. We are still friends today. Unfortunately, she did pass. And I remember thinking how awful that must have been, because it was in our state. It was legally here, and yet it would have taken so long for him to access it. that I said to my husband, I have to do more of this, and became, at that point, a Department of Health approved caregiver, and started receiving calls from
Yeah, I was going to say, do more you did, Diana. That is, there's no doubt.
doctor's offices called with patients. The Department of Health called, and I ran all over Western Pennsylvania trying to deliver this medicine to those who were most in need. That was hard. That was not easy. I remember quickly my daughter became a caregiver with me, and I felt we were seeing these people at the end of their life. And I remember one night crying and saying, we're not saving any of them. My mother was my second patient on my card, as I shared, and I didn't save her with this medicine. And my very intelligent daughter looked at me and said, Mom, we knew we weren't going to save everybody, but we gave them hope.
And you definitely did.
Absolutely. Without question.
It's an amazing, selfless thing to receive a call to do more. And not only did you do more, you created a whole organization to support that, essentially.
And it wasn't easy.
No, and I Diana, I don't even think you give yourself enough credit for this too. And just so everybody knows, this was like things that were, it was like, okay, drop everything and help this person, right? And it wasn't convenient, and it was hard on people and their families and everybody else, and it wasn't free, so it was not easy doing this stuff. So and when you guys did it, you were able to fill that need and with that urgency. And I remember these conversations so many times. Do you know what I mean? And with you and with others, that what do we do? So, that to me was probably, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but man, that was almost more impressive in an acute sense of what you guys were able to do, because and it just came out of the blue. So, and it's such an important part of the program. I don't think, if you don't work in healthcare or see people every day, you don't realize how many people are literally unable to go into a dispensary, get medicine themselves, and then administer on their own. It's a really, a significant percentage of the population. So, and without caregivers, that never happens, right? These people who could benefit from it the most. So it's a really, really, really important thing. So,
and I remember one of the calls, and I was not the caregiver for this case, but I remember hearing from my fellow caregiver that this woman was elderly and she was afraid to talk to her children about wanting to use cannabis. So even the fear from some of the patients kept them from it. And this caregiver stepped in and delivered her medicine, so that she didn't have to be judged maybe by family who didn't get it.
And you make it sound so simple. I want to be clear for everyone listening that it's not as easy as driving down the street to the dispensary, because it's not like how it is now, where you could probably go to the dispensary on Monday, go to the dispensary on Friday, still get the same thing. Might be there. Might be okay. Early on in the program, you had to go and get what you could when it was there.
Yeah.
If it was there.
Yeah.
And we didn't have online menus.
No.
So it really was, for lack of best word, a crapshoot. Driving to these places and hoping they had what you wanted. I mean, how many dispensaries did you honestly have to go to on average to fulfill what you needed?
I did my best to try to go to a dispensary close to where they were, but in the early days,
it's far and few
the closest dispensary to me was an hour away. So I at least tried to stay in their area so that if we found something successful, they didn't have to drive as far. So I drove as far as Washington, PA, which is probably about an hour and a half to pick up the medicine. And then I think my longest drive was 3 hours to deliver to a patient. But I did leave there with so much hope for them, and just gratitude that this program was available and could maybe help them through those difficult days. I think the worst was the ones we knew we weren't going to save.
Always is.
Yeah.
That never goes away,
But we were just at least able to bring a little comfort to the final
that's
days.
what's most important.
Yeah. And one in particular, a very young child, got to the beach.
Sometimes it's just those little things make all the difference. Yeah.
So you had done all of this amazing advocacy work, and you've really been responsible for creating a lot of what this program is today. Act 16 came to be, was signed into law. Eventually we got Flower. Program's doing well. We add new conditions. Anxiety comes about. The program grows overnight. Things get drastically bigger. And you've been taking care of Ryan in the background and still doing your thing. And not to say that you're not involved, but you had kind of taken a back seat a little bit. What brought you back?
I think the back seat was COVID. and family, trying to be present for my family. Ryan has been so well, so healthy, that it gave time for, to do more with my husband and my girls, and the sole focus not always being on Ryan anymore. So I think that it was much needed break. Sadly, not the way it needed to happen, but
Right.
it did. It kind of allowed me to maybe rejuvenate a little bit, get past a lot of the sadness that came with being a caregiver. But then during COVID, there was an addition to our program, which they allowed unlimited patients on the caregiver card. And I do know that because they practiced on my card. I got the call. Could you add all of your family members to your card and see if it works? See if they show up. And I think I still currently have about 11 on my card. So that opened up the ability for the dispensaries and other caregivers who were maybe doing this.
And I think a few organizations did kind of take advantage of that to help people. I know, was it Terravita, I think, at the time?
Yeah.
Had created
Yes,
kind
absolutely.
of a
On the
program,
other side of the state. Yeah.
to support people. Chris Visco was behind that. Yeah. It was a really interesting time for people. I mean, COVID in itself was a very interesting time for the program and everything that was going on. We were able to have curbside, and
Amazing.
which is great.
Yeah.
I'm
up.
glad to see that it exists for certain individuals. I think that's important.
Absolutely.
Drive-throughs come about, which,
Wonderful.
I mean, how is that different than going to Rite Aid or CVS and
Absolutely.
going through the drive-through to get your prescription? So that's, I mean, and a lot of that came with online ordering and menus changing and stuff like that. But there were a lot of positive changes despite the circumstance during COVID.
Absolutely.
That kind of helped the program for sure.
It created a lot more patience, that's for sure, particularly from an anxiety standpoint and things. Those were stressful times for everybody.
They were.
So and so I definitely think it created more patience, which is good. That's the goal of the program, right?
Were you guys doing virtual certifications prior to COVID?
I can't remember the exact timing. I believe that we were preparing to do such. I can't remember the exact timing when it went from brick and mortar to, okay, you're allowed to do this. Right. The writing was on the wall, that's for sure. We saw that coming. And then one of the biggest things was, okay, we have these changes. It's during COVID, sort of the emergency phase. Are things going to go backwards when we get done? You know what I mean? That was one of the big concerns, because that telemedicine, the virtual access for patients was really important,
Life-changing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think that I'm glad that we were able to make those adaptations and changes in the program in a way that they were able to help patients.
Absolutely.
I do believe that was one period of time where the program grew exponentially in a way that it supported itself and really supported patients. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
I
And when
think that
you
was great to see.
yeah, and telemedicine in particular, not only with cannabis, but just as a practice at whole during COVID, that's when it just went. You can imagine you're not going into the doctor's office as much and things like that. But cannabis is the perfect, I guess, specialty, if you want to call it that, with regard to virtual or telemedicine, because it's not a surgical, it's not a tactile thing. It's a lot of discussion and talking, right? So it fits perfect, and I'm glad it stuck around.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, as you said, I mean, it really is the patient's toolbox. So it's a very different situation. And a lot of times these patients who are now recertifying know what works and how to approach things. And it's really great to see. It's nice to see a program that empowers the end user or patient to make choices for themselves.
Absolutely, yeah. And honestly, we should be doing that more in medicine, generally speaking, and healthcare, right? People taking it into their own hands and being to make the choices themselves and being their own advocates and things like that too, So
So now you sit on the advisory board. Can you kind of speak about how that came to be and kind of what your role is?
I think I got a call from a fellow advocate asking if it was something I would be interested in doing. And of course, they had gone to, Zoom calls as well. And they were holding their meetings, via video. And I think if that were not the option, I don't know that I would have agreed to meet at Harrisburg, especially during the winter. I don't like to drive in the winter up over that mountain. So I then said, I might be interested. I want to know more about it. Certainly Luke Schultz, dear friend and advocate, we called him an honorary mama bear. He was part of our C4C family. And so he and I talked a lot as well. And then I was contacted by Governor Wolf's office. We met years ago during my advocacy. He came to a little restaurant, not but an hour from our home when he was campaigning. And I brought Ryan and I shared his story and our fight. And at that meeting, he said, if, this law comes to my desk, I will sign it. So I have thanked him repeatedly over the years for keeping his promise. And I had met with him during our advocacy as well, prior to our law being passed, and at a couple of different events. So, we had pictures with him, so forth. So whether he remembered us, he certainly knew of my family.
Right.
And so they reached out and said that he would like to nominate me because I was an appointee by the governor.
Okay.
And since Luke was leaving, I would be taking his spot as a patient advocate. I got placed in the patient caregiver subcommittee and the medical research subcommittee. And shortly thereafter, maybe about 6 months to a year after getting in, our subcommittee chair resigned and left. So I was then nominated as the chair of our patient caregiver subcommittee. I think that my biggest role on the advisory board is just to continue the education of this plant. Share Ryan's story. A local politician said to me recently, don't ever stop sharing Ryan's story. And I kind of chuckled and I was like, you know what, I won't, because Ryan is one of the successes of this program. He went from over 400 seizures a day that we could count to now most days under 25. And the only real change is the cannabis. In fact, we've been able to take him off of his diet. We've been able to take him off of one pharmaceutical. We've weaned 2 others. So the only real addition is the cannabis. So continuing to share that with members of the board, and not only his success story, but others as well, I think keeps it, in the forefront of their minds, even if this isn't a plant that they fully are educated on or support.
No, and you know what, Diane, it puts something, it's tangible. You hear so many great stories about cannabis of people getting help and, whether it's pain, seizures and things like that. But and I know at least this was the case with me, it was, you're in the flesh. You guys are walking and talking, right? So it puts this personality to what you hear about all these things, right? Because I know still as a doctor, one of the things, especially people are like, "Wow, you guys feel like cannabis works everything. It helps everything," and I'm like, "Well, not everything, but it does help a lot, right?" So when you can put actual real people with these stories, right, and you can see it is unbelievably powerful, right? So, and like you said, keeping it in the forefront of their mind, people can forget, when politics changes and money talks, we all know. So making sure that folks never forget like that is key.
Absolutely.
So I could sit here all night, and I really would like to, but I don't think my boss would be happy if I didn't come to work tomorrow. I do, if you don't mind, I'd like to end with something in particular. If you wouldn't mind, you've already spoken to Ryan's story, and thank you for doing so. I'm so glad that we're going to be able to share this with our platform and so many people because it's so important. But would you mind sharing another success story that really has resonated with you or that has spoken with you, you've experienced in your time?
Absolutely. I actually reached out and asked this mother if I could share her daughter's story. And she said I absolutely could, and I can share her name. Scotland was, I believe, 2 months old when she experienced her first seizure. And this was not long after our program got started, or at least it was signed. I don't think it was officially working just yet.
Okay.
At 5 months, she went into status, seizing uncontrollably. And the only recourse the doctors had at the time was to put her in a coma. And mom, at that point, was very knowledgeable and had learned a little bit about Charlotte Figi and Charlotte's Web. And during that stay in the hospital, asked if she could use the CBD oil. At first, it was denied. But then they had this little girl that they couldn't wake up for fear of seizing. And we're already, using some heavy dose pharmaceuticals that were not helping. And mom believes in, the first drop of that under her tongue, they started seeing improvement. So much so that the doctors then supported her CBD use. She then, I think the first time she and I talked was she went into a dispensary and talked about what she was going to do with the product and was told she wasn't allowed to do that. So I got the call that, isn't she allowed to do that? And it was basically to take that medicine home and incorporate it however she needed to so that her daughter could ingest it. And so we did a little education, and she was absolutely allowed to do that. I want to say she was a toddler when that started. Her mom sent me a picture of the first day of school, and this was a child that was told she wouldn't walk, she wouldn't talk, would probably end up tooth-fed like my son, standing in the picture, smiling. She has shared that during 2020, I believe, some more aggressive seizures started happening, and they chose to do a hemispherectomy. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah.
Yeah. And since then, just cannabis, off all other pharmaceuticals.
Wow.
And we don't talk about when the last seizure was because we're a very superstitious lot, but it was a long time ago.
That's such a beautiful thing to hear.
Yeah.
That's an amazing story.
I think it makes us all just wish we had cannabis when our little ones were 5 months old,
And I think that's why you fought for what you did, is so that other people can have that opportunity. I mean, you went through so much, but I think in part it was due to help others. You experienced things that other people didn't so that you could help them through it.
I tell everybody I started for my son first and foremost, and then I met this group of fellow, advocates, and every one of their stories became just as important as his. Even the ones, we lost while we were fighting, they weren't here to have their voice anymore. So I think it's probably one of the proudest things I've done. And prior to my mom passing, she said to me, "I'm so proud of you. You don't even know the people that this is going to probably help." And I know I don't, but it makes me very proud to have done this for a child who will never walk, who will never talk. And if it were not for my son, I would have never done this. So the legacy that is going to be left because of him is probably more important than anything.
And because of you too, Diana, because of you too, that's sort of the whole story, and that's what makes it special, right? Yeah, absolutely. And you should, in my opinion, you should be proud. You're an amazing mom. You're an amazing wife. You're an amazing advocate, and I hope you know just how much it's all appreciated. Right? I don't think it comes back a lot, but really is. Yeah.
You kind of left me without words with that last one. I mean, the way you speak about things is so eloquent and speaks to why all of us do this day in and day out. I too definitely would applaud you for everything that you've done, and I don't have children, let alone having children that are medically fragile, so I can't imagine being there every hour, every minute of every day and being completely selfless. I did lie to you, though. I have one more question. If you could share anything with those listening this evening, what would you like to say?
I shared with you that Joe had just asked me to speak to a new mom who was starting her journey with her daughter. And we spoke for hours. And I left her with this: do not fear this plant. There has never been a moment that Ryan has been taking this plant, even the early days when I had no idea of what the hell I was doing or how much I was administering. I never feared that he wouldn't wake up. I never feared that he wouldn't breathe. And yet, 2 of the pharmaceuticals that I gave him through his lifetime, we knew to start CPR quite possibly would happen after administering it. So I think that's it. Don't fear it. Don't let the stigma keep you from trying it. As Dr. Donner said, what's the worst that's going to happen? It's going to make you a little munchy and maybe make you sleepy.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been such a pleasure to hear your story, and I'm so glad that we're able to share it with others.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for coming, Diana. It was great
Absolutely.
to see you.
It was
again,
really great to see you, Dr.
absolutely. I'm
Donner.
glad we got to talk and everything. To have a feeling we'll probably have you back if you come.
Absolutely.
Oh my goodness, I would need like 3 more episodes, probably. I know.
That's it.
I know.
I'd love to talk to you about COVID at some point, sort of off the books.
Oh my. Yeah.
Be an interesting.
I'm sure she has some crazy stories.
That's why I want to talk to her. Yeah.
Scary
Off
times.
mic. We gotta get off
I was
mic.
going to say, it was scary times, but thankfully none of us got it during COVID. It was after the boosters.
Thank God.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, folks, thank you for joining us this evening for another episode of From Seed to Script. We'll see you next time.
And there you have it, a glimpse into the fascinating world of From Seed to Script. As the episode draws to a close, our gratitude is extended to listeners and guests for sharing their wisdom and passion. Their stories have planted seeds of understanding, highlighting the promise of a healthier tomorrow. But this is not a farewell. It's merely a brief pause. In the next episode, the journey through the ever-evolving script of medical cannabis in Pennsylvania will continue. More tales will be unearthed, patient journeys explored, and the latest innovations that cultivate healing in communities will be uncovered. A special thank you goes to Marcus and Christian from Still Crazy Studios for providing the incredible recording space, and a shout out to ZY Productions for their videography. Be sure to check them out. And remember, from seed to script, the journey is not just a progression. It's a rhythm, a dance, a symphony of possibilities. Thank you for joining in this episode. We look forward to welcoming you back as more seeds are sown in future episodes. Until then, be well and be kind.